A good contract is worth its weight in gold. Are you a creative entrepreneur who contracts your services to others? Well, listen up, because this is for you. The Smithers Law Group has created 14 master contracts specifically for creative entrepreneurs. These contracts are industry specific, they're fully customizable, and you only pay a one-time fee. This is so much better and more affordable than speaking with an attorney who's going to charge you an hourly consultation fee, and it's so much more secure than just Googling up your contract and hoping for the best. Find your fully customizable and industry-specific contract at stulawgroup.com. Search for the contract link. And don't forget to tell them that I sent you.
Think about the stories that we do see of people who have been involved in the carceral system and whatnot. The voyeuristic way in which we engage with that is very much a, you know, at least they're doing well, but not better than me. It's a very pity focused. It's a very undignified way in which we look at people who've been impacted by incarceration. Well, you should just be grateful for this. Like
Yes.
we should like, and that to me is the essence of why I started my organization, because I will not be told, nor will I allow other women to be told what they should be grateful for.
Repeat after me. I bring more than diversity. I bring irreplaceable perspectives. Hey friends, my name is Whitney, and I'm the host of Impostrix Podcast, the show that validates professionals of color navigating imposter syndrome and racial toxicity in their career. Join us and be validated. You got this. Welcome back to Impostrix Podcast. My name is Whitney Lee, and I am here with Gabrielle Perry. I'm looking forward to this conversation. It's an important one. As you know, if you're a regular listener to Impostrix Podcast, April is Second Chance Month, and it's a time where governments, citizens, entities, whoever, nonprofits, really put a lot of focus in helping to navigate reentry for incarcerated people who are coming back into society. And we've got a long, long way to go. But one area that I have a lot of interest in because of my work experience is in what it's like for incarcerated people to return to work and to build careers, and the impact that incarceration has on systems, on people, on communities, on families, everything from career to housing to health. So our guest today, Gabrielle, is the founder, executive director of the Thurman Perry Foundation. And I'm going to let her talk all about the work that she does and how, where she's coming from. And so thank you for joining us, Gabrielle. Please introduce yourself. What identities do you bring to this conversation?
I'm so happy to be here. Thank you. My name is Gabrielle Perry. I, again, am founder and executive director of the Thurman Perry Foundation. I'm also a 31-year-old epidemiologist hailing from the great state of Louisiana. At least we try to be.
Sorry.
My organization, the Thurman Perry Foundation, is named in memory of my deceased father, but we solely serve women and girls impacted by incarceration. We are an award-winning Louisiana-based nonprofit operating nationally solely in service to those women and girls. We have a 3-tier programming at the Thurman Perry Foundation, starting with the Perry Second Chances Scholarship, which essentially was born from me giving money out on Twitter on my savings account, to a full-fledged scholarship program, awarding scholarships to currently incarcerated women, formerly incarcerated women, and the daughters of anyone who has ever been incarcerated, as long as they are enrolled in a 2 to 4 year college, university, or vocational school. As of the end of next month, because we extended applications this year, as of the end of next month, we will have awarded $100,000 in scholarships in 3.5 years. So I'm very, very excited. We also have the bread and butter of my organization, which is called Girl Code. Girl Code was born from my birth mother's experiences while she was incarcerated. We essentially are the only organization in this country donating organic menstrual products to incarcerated women and girls in multiple states. So we operate in Louisiana, in Texas, and we just expanded to the state of New York. So we are very, very excited. We have since September of 2021, we've donated over 206,000 organic menstrual products, which is a feat because I have no staff, I have no physical location. I handle everything digitally or automated wise or via email. It's just me and my board. Made up of women just like myself who are formerly incarcerated or have been impacted by incarceration in some way. And we're just trying to meet the need in a tangible way. It's also led us to our third program, which we are currently fundraising for now. We are $4,500 shy of our goal, but it's called Mother's Day 365. For about a year after I was arrested, I was homeless, as is such the case with women across this country. It's women and girls who are the fastest growing group of incarcerated people in this country, and we're also more likely to be homeless than formerly incarcerated men. And so Mother's Day 365 is about paying the rent and mortgages of formerly incarcerated pregnant women and mothers to ensure that they can have and maintain safe housing after their arrest. Because, you know, if I just am not of the belief that once incarceration ends, the should continue. That's just not what this system is supposed to be about.
Right. Yeah. I love everything about this. So I've shared with listeners that, my experience is not that of a formerly incarcerated person. My experience is as an attorney who went in and out of jails and prisons, seeing women and men, and then leaving. And working with people on, whatever their civil rights issue was, on parole and on reentry. And it is mind-boggling just how many barriers there are
Mhm.
to, like, once you enter the criminal legal system, whether it's an arrest or whether it's a citation and like a civil fine or fee, whether it's community service, at the point of entering the criminal legal system, everything just piles on. And in my experience working with folks, more often than not, people do not have that support. And so when I hear you talking about the programs that you all offer, um, everything from feminine hygiene products, which come to Georgia, because there are 4 women's prisons in Georgia. And out of all of these prisons, it was so regular to hear stories in the jails of women having no access to feminine hygiene products, zero, and using clothing, using their clothing, and then having to wash their clothing in their sink and hope that it dries and then wrap it around themselves again the next day. You talk a lot about dignity as far as one of your main values. And it's awful to begin to imagine the loss of dignity that women have when they can't even access basic feminine hygiene products. But the other thing that I find I'm just so excited about is the Mothers 365. As a housing attorney, it's been nearly impossible to get people into safe and affordable housing. And sometimes it is a matter of $500, $1,000 for a security deposit, which is going to be a larger security deposit than anybody else's security deposit because you have had criminal involvement with the criminal legal system. So hearing about the work that you do brings me a lot of hope for people who will be impacted by your services.
Hey, y'all. So let's switch gears for just a minute. We talk so much about empowerment of folks of color on this show. And now I want to take a second to talk about our legacy. It's so important that as we're out here doing our thing and making that money and trying to be the people that we want to be for our communities and families, that we get our estate plan together. And I know estate planning can be overwhelming. We've got your back. Our team is here to guide you every step of the way. Wills for the People is an estate planning practice that prioritizes creating and advancing generational wealth, particularly within families of color and middle-class families. This is because it's so important that we just get started. So, what do you want your legacy to be? And what steps have you taken to ensure that that happens? Take those steps with Wills for the People, where intentional planning meets transformative results. Visit our website for your free consultation at willsforthepeoplega.com. Mention Impostrix Podcast and we'll give you 10% off of your package. All right, I'll see you over there. Let's get back to the show.
Thank you. That means so much. I think that I say this all the time. I feel like anybody who knows me is watching this would probably get tired of hearing it or roll their eyes. But I always say that there is no national narrative surrounding women's incarceration, because when we think of incarceration in the US, we think of a man. And the only time we really engage with incarceration in terms of women is in twofold. Either we are engaging in the voyeurism that is true crime. So a woman has been a victim of a crime, or she has been charged with a crime in a sensational way, in a way that is also in tandem with a man. So we are just kind of obsessed with those types of stories. We never hear about what the reality is for incarceration with women. We just kind of deal with the extremes, or we deal solely with women who are victims of crimes. But the reality is that the majority of women who are incarcerated are victims of crimes. So it's definitely a victim and perpetrator duality. And that's where a lot of women get caught in the crossfire in terms of resources being applied to them, because you cannot address a problem, one, that you don't know is there, and two, that you actually have no empathy for. It's so difficult for women to be able to access any resources before, during, or after incarceration, because if we even remember them at all, they are still stuck with the mantle of being immoral, because regardless of the fact that 1 in 3 Americans has a criminal record in this country, we still associate incarceration with, or even just in any kind of introduction with the criminal legal system, with a moral failing. Like you are somehow an inherently bad person and you need to turn from your ways, and anything that you endure as a result of your incarceration is ultimately at its foundation your own doing and your own fault. And that spits in the face of everything we as Americans are enduring with our incredibly poverty-based society, like how we are forced to survive with roughly no safety net and strict provisions on the few ones that we do have. And so there are women just sitting in the middle of all of that. And so you find that we also tend to believe that the law in and of itself is gender blind, like it's somehow immune from the societal biases that everything else operates under, which is absolutely insane. Like going back to menstrual products. So when we first started this, I remember going to the sheriff's department near me locally, and with one of my college professors from Tulane, and having a meeting and just being like, hey, I really want to make sure that these women have quality products. I came to the cops from a very epidemiological standpoint, because the average woman just in the general population is going to use from 12 to 16,000 menstrual products throughout her menstruating life. And so with there being relatively no control over like what's being put into these products and whatnot, and I just wanted to make sure that these women had something, especially because products that you find in jails and prisons are not the same as what you'd see at like the feminine hygiene aisle at Target or something like that. They are not dealing with that. And so even then you may find that these women are being given like 1 or 2 tampons, if the facility allows tampons, because many facilities you will find consider tampons to be a security risk. So
Right.
they will only allow menstrual pads, which is what we donate. If they are given any at all, they'll be given like 2 per month. They have to pay for the rest. The majority of women who are incarcerated in this country were extremely incarcerated prior to extremely impoverished prior to being incarcerated. So it's only leading to worse when they are incarcerated. And so you have the different states paying these women or not paying them at all, because certain states like Texas do not pay incarcerated women for their absolutely free labor. You have states like my state, let's use Louisiana, for example. An incarcerated woman will make anywhere from 4 cents to 40 cents per hour. If you get a super cushy work study job, you might get $1 an hour, maybe. And that's if you're like working at like the governor's mansion or something like that.
Right.
Like that is, which typically they reserve work study jobs for the men because, and you want to know why?
Why?
Because there are concerns about the female trustees becoming pregnant, which essentially eliminates you from consideration just by being a woman, just by your own
Right.
biology. And so, just because they are making so little, the cost for these things, which are provided by outside vendors, things like menstrual products, things like a pencil and paper and whatnot, are astronomical. We were told by our very first currently incarcerated winner, when we first started the program, she was saying, it'll cost me like $13 for a box of tampons, but it'll take me like 150 hours just to work for it, like up to, depending on like what's available to me and what I'm able to do. And that's just
Right.
for like maybe a box of like 20 tampons. These women are definitely improvising. One of my former board members, her name is Kimberly Haven. She's a national name in terms of advocating for menstrual equity for incarcerated women. She spoke about like her own experience having to have an emergency hysterectomy due to using menstrual products past their viability, because this is a health risk. It can cause toxic shock syndrome. It can be fatal to these women who are only trying to survive. You have these corrections officers, because again, the majority of corrections officers in women's facilities are men,
Mm-hmm.
and you're having these corrections officers coerce these women into sexual acts and sexual violence in exchange for menstrual products so that they can just try to menstruate with dignity. And
Right.
even then, being able to move in and out, not just in prisons, but the jails, being able to move in and out of the prisons and jails just to visit your lawyer, having to, squat and cough and then go back out and then go back in, like just being having the freedom of movement while you menstruate is compromised, because if you're only given 2 tampons per month, but I gotta go see my lawyer in visitation, and oh, my mom's here just to let me see my baby, like, okay, well, that's my
That's your two.
2 tampons a month, that's my two, and I'm done,
Yeah.
and I can't have anything else. And so these women are using socks, they are cutting up their clothes and inserting them inside themselves. They are using mattress stuffing by opening up their prison issued mattresses. And what people don't often realize is that in some states, because if these women choose to not do anything at all, let's just say you try to free bleed it and you don't want to engage in any kind of alternative methods, that is destruction of prison property. And that can lead to time upon your sentence because you are free bleeding onto your prison issued clothes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really a no win situation. It is inhumane. And it is part of just the growing epidemic of incarceration for women in this country.
Yeah. It's you talked about commissary, you talked about the cost of products in relation to the amount of money that people are able to make if they're working in jails and prisons. And this is classic racial capitalism. This is classic 13th Amendment allowed slavery. Um, and when we think about the access that people have to any product, to food, in jails and prisons, it is important to think about that the cost is not being subsidized. The cost
Mhm.
of whatever it is that people need or people want is not being subsidized by the fact that they're making pennies.
Mhm.
And so a lot of people, it strikes me the poverty that most people are in when they're living in a jail or a prison. And then the poverty, of course, that they're going to face as they move back into society. And so, money is so important here. And I think that's something that we don't talk explicitly about
We
is
don't. We
money.
don't.
And especially when we're dealing with incarcerated people, because they, quote, did something wrong, they deserve this punishment. And so everything that happens inside the jail and prison is their punishment, when in fact, that's actually not the case. That's not the purpose of jail and prison.
I don't even want to get caught in, I love that you brought up money, because I don't even want to get caught up in the belief that money and the carceral system kind of in their relationship as like once you leave the insides of those prisons and jails, because that's not true. It's an entire process.
Mhm.
I've been researching this so much for my upcoming book. Like, it's really and truly a process that starts before you ever get inside the jail. And I think that people need to really familiarize themselves with the concept of carceral debt. The reason that so many people have a criminal record is not because we as Americans are just morally depraved people. That's not what it is. This is a system that needs us to survive. It needs fodder. And so when you have people, let's say, you are arrested on like just a very minor misdemeanor. Okay, well, from that point, like, if you get past the site, like let's say you're not issued a citation, but even then, that is also money you have to pay to the system. You have to feed the beast. Okay, if you're arrested for a minor misdemeanor, you have to pay court fees, you have to pay court costs, you have to secure a lawyer. Even there's even a fee to pay public defenders, depending on which state. There's still a minor fee you have to pay that is not free. You have to pay the cost to gas up your car to get there, to pay for parking at the courthouse. Like, all these things have to pay. And then let's say once the case is even dismissed and whatnot. Let's say it's dismissed, you have to pay to in order to be able to get your record expunged. Because what a lot of people don't realize is that regardless of whether it's a guilty or not guilty verdict, that arrest is still in your record. And that is going to impact, unless you get that expunged, that is going to impact every job you have, everywhere you live for the rest of your life. Juveniles are not exempt from that either. Those records are not sealed depending on what state you are in.
Right.
And so that can change the trajectory of your life. Let's say your case is a bit more serious and whatnot. You are incarcerated for a certain period of time. You are paying, incarcerated people pay health insurance copays.
Mm-hmm.
They pay for tuition if they have access to education. They have
Mm-hmm.
to pay for food. They have to pay for medicine. They have to pay to see a doctor. All these things have to be paid. They have to be secured by these people. Nothing is free. There is nothing free inside of when you are incarcerated. Nothing. Nothing.
Right. And if you
And
can't pay it, then you leave with debt.
And if you can't pay it, you will leave with that debt even when your sentence is over. And that is truly, at least for me in my experience, that was when the punishment truly started for me.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was like, I could pay the court fees, I could pay the court costs and whatnot. It was trying to find a job, which I love. This prison policy. It's a nonprofit think tank that does a
Mm-hmm.
ton of research on incarceration. They did an article about how a lot of corporations that purport to be supportive of hiring people with criminal records and whatnot, they're doing the follow-up trends on that now, and that is not at all true. I applied at Sherwin-Williams. They told me to my face that because I had an arrest on my record that I would not be able to be hired. I remember, like, just not being able to secure safe housing. I was living in like this little shack, which I think somebody has bought and really fixed up in the 10 years since this all happened. But I just didn't have, I was so by myself. I didn't have anything. I didn't have anybody. And I was racking up all this debt because
Mm-hmm.
you have to pay restitution. You have to pay for the classes that are often recommended, even if for a misdemeanor charge, which is what I ended up settling for. You have to pay for court mandated classes. You have to pay your probation officer. These people have to be paid, and you're the one who has to pay them. And a lot of people don't realize, like, the government is using private vendors for the majority.
Mm.
There's a real misunderstanding that people think that you're paying the government or that all this is just handled by one entity. No, there are multiple entities that work within the carceral system to profit off of people's suffering. And so you will take those debts with you forever. They will impact your credit. And because you have that criminal record, you cannot sustain gainful employment to be able to get your record expunged, to be able to get an actual gainfully employed job to pay these debts back. And so then what happens. That cycle of poverty continues to a boiling point until it can't anymore. And then we enter recidivism territory,
Right.
because hungry people are not hungry for long, especially for women. Women, like the majority of women who are incarcerated, up to like 75% or so, are mothers. They have children to feed. When we incarcerate women, we incarcerate entire communities. 98% of these women are going to be out eventually. They're going to come back out. Then these children have to be taken care of. They have to be taken care of. And so, what do you expect people to do? What do you expect them to do when you saddle them with all this debt? I remember when my birth mother was actually released on compassionate release, because my story with my birth mother is so really set the course of my entire life. My birth mother actually gave me away to total strangers the day that I was born, to try to save me from her fate of being incarcerated or being impacted by the decisions that she made as an adult. And so while she was incarcerated, she was experiencing severe abdominal pain, as the story was told to me, many years. And so she suffered through that. And what they kept telling her was menstrual cramps ended up being stage 4 metastatic colon cancer. And so when they sent her home on compassionate release, it was right before, it was about 9 to 10 months before she actually passed away. And so when she did pass away, we of course sued for myself and my siblings for um, her negligent death, and a wrongful death lawsuit ensued. And even when we settled, the first people who had to be paid back were Medicaid for her unpaid doctor bills.
Yeah.
And so it truly opened my eyes to what this system is and how it eats people alive.
And I think that's it. So many people, yourself included, as I understand it, interact or are become involved in the criminal legal system because of, quote, these crimes of poverty. So
Mhm.
these actions that we take, um, because we don't have money. When I
Mhm.
left Seattle 10 years ago, they were criminalizing sleeping on park benches,
Mm.
petty theft, urinating in public, these types of what society has deemed to be crimes
Mhm.
that people may commit out of necessity. And
Mm.
the thought of a multi-billion-dollar industry of the incarceration, the prison industrial complex, profiting off of the traps that are set at essentially every step of the way as you're navigating this system is disgusting, and just what you spoke about is um, really enlightening. I wonder if you'll share with us about your experience, not only, I mean, if you want, you can share what you were arrested for, but really what I want to know is what your reentry and what your, I guess, process to become stable, both financially, but also with housing and with relationships in your life. If those were impacted, I'm really interested to learn about that, and then of course with your work because you are now an epidemiologist.
My story is so complicated. When it makes sense to me, but I feel like when I tell people the story, like they get a bit confused. So I mentioned siblings earlier. I was actually raised an only child from my parents. Essentially, let me start from the beginning, I guess. So mm, my birth mother, I was the fifth and final kid of hers. She had my three brothers and my oldest sister. These are my biological siblings, my biological mother. But I was the only one to grow up not knowing I was adopted, not knowing her, not knowing any of them. I like to believe that by the time that I came along, or she found out she was pregnant with me, that she knew something had to change. And so I was supposed to go to her best friend who was already raising one of my brothers at the time. There was just no room for me. And so she ended up giving me to the coworker of one of her best friends, who is my mother and the only
Wow.
mother I've ever truly known. And from that day forward, I had a family, but my parents were much older when I
Mm.
was born. So I had older parents, and I kind of came into this world as a caretaker, especially when I was about 9 or 10. My adoptive mother was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. She had to literally relearn how to walk. I spent a lot of my childhood taking care of her, bathing her, feeding her, clothing her, and whatnot. She's great now. Like, she's fine. I see the look on your face. She's up
What?
the street all the
Wow.
time.
Okay,
She's great.
okay.
Yeah,
I'm
she's
all
great.
like, oh no, somebody else died. No.
No, no. Well, I will say so. But as soon as my mom was able to like get through physical therapy, at least get on crutches, and drive again, and we had a little bit of a brief reprieve from what this had been. My dad got diagnosed with cancer, with head and neck cancer, and so I think within like 6, 7 months of diagnosis, he was gone. And so he died when I was 15. I spent all that time um, taking care of him, me and my mom trying to just work it out. And so I was a sophomore in high school. I was just shy. He died like 2 months shy of my 16th birthday. And so I'm trying to navigate finishing school. I'm trying to navigate taking care of my mom. I'm working 2 jobs in high school. I'm doing everything we can because with my dad's death came the loss of a big source of income.
Right.
And so literally just duct taping everything that I can together as long as possible. I ended up getting a scholarship to LSU and was able to go to Baton Rouge, which I was very excited about. But I still had my mom to think about, who
Mhm.
was 3 hours away in Alexandria. And so I'm paying kids to, with my little bitty internship money, I'm paying kids to like drive me back to my hometown, so I can help take care. I had neighbors taking care of her. I grew up in a very, very close knit neighborhood. So I had neighbors checking in on her and helping her and getting her groceries and whatnot, and just trying to like do what I could. And it felt impossible. It really did. And I wasn't talking to anyone about it. And so I ended up taking money from my work study job in order to try to sustain both she and I. And I think after a few months, I got caught. I confessed immediately. Like, it just wasn't something I was going to hide from. I was arrested, and I spent literally a full day in jail. And I always tell people, like, there's this hierarchy in criminal justice reform when we tell these stories, where if you didn't do 20 years standing on your head, then you got to go to the back of the room. Like, your pain doesn't count. But I feel like those are the anomalies.
Mm.
I am the majority. I am the everyday person. And there's a book coming out called, I think it's called A Day is Unto 1,000 Years, something like that. And it talks about how one day in the criminal justice system, one day in jail can destroy your life. Because I had lost my job. I had had this very public criminal record and whatnot, because the media and the carceral system work in tandem. They are also
Mhm.
partners. And so it made it, even though I was innocent until proven guilty, it made it impossible to navigate that situation. And so that fed into me being homeless, despite the fact that I had a very kind, extremely compassionate judge on my case. He was a lovely man. He and I actually did an interview together for CBS Morning News with Gail King about my story. Very lovely man who literally told the cameras, he was like, I just was not going to ruin this girl's life. Like, I just was not going to do that. And he saw that my crime was about survival. Like, he
Right.
saw that I had meant no ill will. I paid every cent back and worked my butt off to do so. I was doing my court mandated classes, and I had to keep working because I was like paying all this stuff off. And so I ended up working at Cane's, Raising Cane's, and at I forget the name of the restaurant, but they were like within walking distance of each other. And so I would end one shift at the restaurant during the day and then work at Cane's till 3 in the morning. So I really
Wow.
was like working my butt off.
Wow.
And what I loved about working for Raising Cane's is that that's kind of where, because it's mostly kids that work there, with kids of my age, and I had been surrounded like by really nobody except like the immensity of my own thoughts
Mm.
and like my own suffering. And so kind of working at Cane's put me back around people my age and made me feel like a person again. And I got to see, like, got to make friends, and I got to see people like my age doing age appropriate things. And you cannot be what you cannot see. So it sort of breathed a lot of life back into me. And so that kind of started the journey of me thinking, okay, what is next? Like, what do I need to be doing? What can I do? I need to go back to school. I need to finish my degree to take care of like everything. At the time, my mom, I called my aunt and uncle. They stepped in, thank God, and they took my mom in to help take care of her while I got myself together. And so I ended up leaving one of my jobs and going to ask one of the professors at Southern University if I could be an intern in his cancer research lab.
Hmm.
And he said yes. He's a lovely man. And so I worked for him for about 11 months. And I never told him what was happening. I think he just assumed that I was like a student from a different school. Like he didn't know, I think, until he knew. Like,
Mm.
and he never treated me any differently. I think he
Wow.
knew because I was taking about 3 or 4, like really like three, maybe 4 buses, depending on what was happening. And like, I just felt like, okay, if I'm gonna go back to school, I need to have something like that says I'm serious about this, because I had been on probation for a year, and I still had to check in with the courts. And so I was doing my community service, which they also mandated, but I felt like, okay, if I have this, it shows that I'm ready to get back to normal. And so I worked for Dr. Gray for 11 or so months. And I ended up applying to go back to school. I wanted to start slow. I started at community college, got my associate's degree. Then I applied to go back to the full university to finish my degree in biological sciences. And then I felt like once I finished my undergrad degree, like we're all systems go now. Like I just felt
Yeah.
like I can do this. And so that was also around the time that I started getting more comfortable telling my story, because one thing about being incarcerated and being a formerly incarcerated person, it's a box that you can never come out of. Like you can never go back into once you come out of it. It's why a lot of people don't talk about it. Like you would never
Hmm.
guess 1 in 3 people in this country are estimated to have a criminal record. And so, because people don't talk about it, we associate it as a terrible thing, a moral failing. We wonder what you did and why you did it, and we don't want to be associated with that.
And you're a
Um,
bad person.
and you're a bad person.
Yeah.
And at that point in time, I felt like I'll be whatever anybody wants me to be. I don't care. Like
Mhm.
I'm fine with this. And so I remember my personal statement for the epidemiological program at Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine. Shout out to them. Talk about like me being in jail, and like the first sentence, like, do you know what I remember most about being in jail? And it's how kind everyone was. Like the women were so kind to me. I remember being very mostly in shock about everything around me. I wasn't really reacting to a ton of things, but I remember once I found out that I was on the news, I started hyperventilating in the holding cell, in the
Mhm.
pink holding cell in East Baton Rouge Parish Prison. And one of the women, she was like a Latino woman, and she was like, "Girl, it's gonna be fine." And she was like, "Girl, like it's fine, everything's cool. You want some water?" Like I was like, and like one of the female deputies came over, and she was like, "Girl," like
But it's a big deal.
I was like, "I am 20 years old. Like I'm trying to figure it out, please." And everybody was just like, they were very patient with me, but they were mostly just like, "Girl, like it's gonna be okay." laughed with me and they joked with me. Once I had been in the holding cell for so long that after a certain time they processed everybody to the back. So I ended up going to the back, and I remember, oh my God, now I'm getting emotional.
Mm.
I remember this girl who couldn't have been more than probably like 3 or 4 years older than me, and she was so beautiful. Like, you ever just meet people who are just like ethereally beautiful, like you can't stop staring? She was a
Yes.
beautiful girl. And I could tell she had been there for a while. She shared like a little bit of what she was there for, because her and her sister were there, and her boyfriend was on the men's side because the prison is co-ed. And she just like walked over to me and started talking to me, and she was so nice. It was as if we were just meeting for lunch, and this was like 11 o'clock at night in the parish prison. Like, and she shared some snacks with me because I had not really eaten all day. I had been in
Hmm.
holding all day. They arrested me very, very early in the morning, um, and transferred me to the prison. And so I hadn't really eaten, and they were running low on inventory. So she gave me a blanket, and she said, "I'm gonna come back and check on you, okay?" And she did. She would come and check on me like every about 20 minutes or so periodically. And she would
Wow.
just like go and talk to everybody. I could tell she had been there for a while because she knew everyone's names. Like, she had been
Yeah.
there for a while. And she I remember when they called me, I think I got bailed out at like 4 in the morning or something like that. This is 10 years ago. So it was like maybe 3, 4 in the morning, something like that. I don't know. They called my name, like a female officer walked in and just called my name and said that I was being bailed out. And I remember the first thing I did was like turn my head looking for that girl, and she looked at me, and we just like ran up to each other and hugged each other. And I know that
Wow.
sounds crazy, but like, she kissed me on my cheek and she said, "You're gonna be okay." And she rubbed my back, and then I left. And I would truly give anything to like be able to see her again. I don't remember her name, but I see her face so clearly in my mind. Her and her sister were there for drug charges, I later learned, because it was in the paper. But
Mm.
just that kindness of her and all the women around me, like everyone laughing and being so kind, like no one was, I think there was just a lot of camaraderie in that moment. And I just did not feel like I was a bad person like everyone was treating me. I just felt like a person with
Yeah.
them. And so I really appreciated that. And there were times when I was trying to rebuild my life where I would think about those women because I just was tired of being treated subhuman for having a criminal record. And I missed the only people who treated me like a person. Um, but anyway, when I finished undergrad, it was time to go to grad school. And I wrote about those women, and I wrote about that day, and I wrote about what I wanted to do. And I got to grad school and I soared. I loved grad school. I loved being an epidemiologist. I still love being an epidemiologist. In fact, they awarded me, I want to say, was it last year? It was last April. They gave me an award. They created an award for me. Apparently, it was the Graduate of the Last Decade Award, which was intense. So I was like,
Wow.
it was
Of the
intense.
last decade?
Of the last decade, like the baddest to do it in this whole decade. I was like, okay.
Right. And they created it for you. Like, we have got to figure out how to get Gabrielle an award. We gonna make up something and it's gonna be badass and we gonna give it to her.
I think it came from that same professor though that I had called upon to help me. Because by the time I had gotten my life back together and whatnot, I was having a lot of survivor's guilt. Like 2019 was a wild year because I was so happy to finish my epidemiological degree and be starting my career and whatnot. But I had a ton of survivor's guilt. I really did, because I felt like, okay, that was also the year that we settled my birth mother's wrongful death lawsuit with the Texas Bureau of Prisons 2 months before I graduated.
Wow.
And so if that, and almost like that was like a 10 years and a month from when she died. And so if that had not happened when it did, I wouldn't even have my job currently because of the background checks required for me to do what I do. And so everything came out so perfectly aligned. So it was the settlement of the lawsuit, the distribution of funds, the application for the expungement of my record, which cost me $3,000,
Wow.
and then graduation. And then I think by the time I got to like July, like maybe I can't even say when, but I think it was around July was when I got the notification that no one opposed my record being expunged, and I was free to start my career now. And so I think after Labor Day is when I started my career, and I'm still there today, and getting ready to be promoted. I'm very excited.
Well, it's exciting. So congratulations on the about to be promotion.
Think about the stories that we do see of people who have been involved in the carceral system and whatnot. The voyeuristic way in which we engage with that is very much a, you know, at least they're doing well, but not better than me. It's a very pity focused. It's a very undignified way in which we look at people who've been impacted by incarceration. Well, you should just be grateful for this. Like
Yes.
we get you, like, and that to me is the essence of why I started my organization, because I will not be told, nor will I allow other women to be told what they should be grateful for. I endured a lot of that where it was as if, who was I to want to be an epidemiologist? Someone actually told me they don't let people like me become epidemiologists. And I remember when I started being very open about being formerly incarcerated and whatnot, I had a boss who was a man. And I remember he would just try, like, he would try me in little ways, like as if I should just be grateful to have this job. And I remember he ended up getting fired for some very unsavory things. But I remember thinking to myself, am I going to have to make the choice between hiding the things that I have been through for the comfort of others and the safety of myself, honestly? Or am I going to allow all the different parts of myself, the formerly incarcerated part, the scientist part, like, am I going to like allow every single part of myself in any room that I am in? And I made that choice and I do not regret it.
Wow.
So that was how we did it. That's how we got to today.
Yeah. One of the things, so it's so important for me to learn more about the experiences of formerly incarcerated people as they're re-entering the workforce. Um, but also to share this part of life with listeners who maybe have no interaction with the criminal legal system and who do believe that people who are in jails and prisons deserve to be there. I like to think that nobody listening to the show believes that, but maybe they believe it. And I think for me, my last job was the first job that I worked at that hired people with criminal backgrounds. And it, I think it's a bit of an anomaly, particularly in the legal field, because, well, because of all sorts of reasons. Um, And yet, as great as that is, and I'm saying this because I want people listening to the show to be thinking about how we engage with people who are formerly incarcerated. Um, because exactly what you're saying, it's very much so this air of, well, if you're here, then you're here because you're lucky and you should be grateful. And don't speak up too much, don't talk too much, don't create too many waves, because at the end of the day, you're just somebody that used to be in prison or used to be in jail, and like you're a bad person. So
And that's disgusting to me. Like when I'm confronted with that, it's really disgusting to me. I was not raised, and I can say this for a fact. The reason my organization is named in memory of my father is because not only did he save my life, and not only did he teach me that in no way, shape, form, or fashion am I ever less than a man, or that women are less than men, but I was raised around formerly incarcerated men. My parents had a lawn service. It was called Jules Lawn Service. The only people they hired were the men from the prison work release program in our parish. And once they were actually released, once they were freed, they still had a job with my dad.
Mm.
And they worked for him for years, all those same men. In fact, I'm still in contact with two of them today because they were brothers. We still talk on Facebook. I think I'm trying to convince one of them to have their daughter apply for our scholarship program. Um,
Mhm.
but I never felt unsafe. My dad would leave me alone around these men and whatnot. Like my mom would too. My very, very strict parents, because it just wasn't like these people we've already done like the background checks and whatnot. Like these people are just people and they need jobs and they worked hard. Like the idea that these people are just like morally depraved is so ubiquitous in society. It absolutely makes me sick, especially when we're talking about women, because I touched on it earlier, where there's this belief that the law is gender blind, and that is absolutely
Mhm.
not true. There are so many nuances between incarceration for women and incarceration for men, and if we're just focusing on women, the majority of women who are incarcerated in jails, because remember, jail and prison, not the same thing. I know you know
Right.
that. The majority of women who are incarcerated in jails are legally innocent. They have not been convicted of a crime. So if this is innocent until proven guilty, then those women are just literally sitting in jail for no reason. If we're talking about women who are incarcerated in prisons, the majority of women who are incarcerated in prisons are there for two different types of crimes, and that is property crimes and crimes related to substance use disorder. So if we're talking about nonviolent crime, because since that tends to be the cudgel that people want to land upon, that is the furthest people can go in terms of the moral barriers of incarceration. You are still fine with those people being punished for the rest of their lives. You are still fine with the enduring trauma, though you recognize the fact that they did this to survive. And then you have to talk about the gender bias in sentencing. I mean, we're talking about like, and the first thing the incels online will say is that, well, there are more men in jail, um, um, incarceration affects them more, and women get easier sentencing and things of that nature. No, the best example of that is when our sentences are harsher because we violate those gender norms. For example,
Mhm.
women who are convicted of murder, manslaughter, things of that nature, which is a rarity for women, they tend to get harsher sentences than men do. This is because most often when a woman kills, it is out of self-defense. She has typically been like in an abusive relationship. You could have all the domestic violence evidence in the world. You could have everybody walk up and speak in defense of you, but it doesn't matter because you were in a relationship with him and you should have known better. And we don't do that with men, because when men kill their female partners, that is statistically most often seen as a crime of passion. So we see those men with
Mhm.
manslaughter sentences, with suspended sentences, sometimes depending on what it looks like. We see that leniency and that discrepancy between the sexes when we're talking about these sentences. We also see it when it plays out in family related crimes and whatnot. Failure to protect laws are almost exclusively applied to women, because yes, he was beating the living hell out of you and the child in question and whatnot. But where were you? Where were
Right.
you after number two? What were you doing? And yeah, we
Mhm.
don't care that you went to the shelter. We don't care about any of that. But you should have did 10 times more than what you already did. And we're going to sentence you as an equal co-conspirator. Co-conspirator laws to conspiracy laws and whatnot find women who weren't even present for the crime being given equal sentences to the male perpetrator. So gender bias in sentencing depends on the crime, because when we as women step outside of the gender norms that society has assigned to us, we are immediately punished for it by the carceral system.
Yeah. I talk a lot about complicity, and specifically complicity in racism. And it's this, this realization that when we're not doing things, when our inaction is action. But when we're talking about the criminal legal system and we're talking about the impact that it has on women and on communities, I think it really is necessary that we say enough is enough. Like what you said, that this does have to stop. And that, yes, it's a huge problem. It's not an easy feat, but things like giving feminine hygiene products so that women in jails and prisons can menstruate with dignity, as you said. Um, donating to causes like yours that provide financial assistance, and then like having conversations in the community. Because again, so many of us just trust that someone is involved in this legal system because that's where they belong, because
Mm-hmm.
they did something. And we don't think about how the punishment continues for life.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't think about that that's not the point.
Mm-hmm.
And we can start questioning this. We can start questioning this to our families when we're watching the news and something happens in the news and somebody makes some snide remark. We can talk about this in our workspaces when somebody that we're working with is using language like inmate that is dehumanizing.
And don't be afraid to turn the vibe way down when people are getting ridiculous. Because one thing it hasn't happened recently, but what I think is because anybody who encounters me knows I've done the research. Like I'm writing a whole book. Like we talk to these women. I am constantly at the prison every single month. Like we do this work. So it's very rare that I find people who are just outright like, that's not real. Like that's not happening. And I say that because in the very beginning, I remember being told to my face that my work was distracting from the men, and that
Oh,
was a more pressing issue, and that
mhm.
it was a distraction within the movement for Black lives, to even like that women needed to wait their turn. And I just remember being like, you know what, F y'all, I'll do this myself. Like I'm good. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think, but if you're gonna do it, if you're gonna do this kind of work, you need to be learned. I am not one of those people who are like, if I don't know, I just don't believe that imperfect activism is like a mortal sin. I think that none of us are always going to get it right. I don't believe that. But just to find people who care about this and who are willing to expend energy and resources to it, you can change the world with that kind of person. All you get 2 or 3 or 4 of those people together, sky's the absolute limit. You can change laws, you can change like communities with just 3 or 4 people with like imperfect activism.
Yeah.
I think that we're all human, and I think that expending energy to a cause, no matter how imperfect it is, like it's still energy well spent. So I think that my best advice would be to get creative.
Wow. Thank you. Okay, so if we want to donate, where or I guess otherwise just if we wanted to follow you, but really we should be thinking about donating. So if we wanted to donate, where should we how do we do that?
If you would like to donate, preferably before April the 20th, because we're $4,500 away. But once we reach this $4,500, we will have enough money to pay the rent or mortgages of 2 formerly incarcerated pregnant women and moms every month for one full calendar year. So we are very, very excited. We are raising money for our via our event, Mother's Day 365, a jazz luncheon and fundraiser honoring system impacted moms. So if you're in the area, if you want to get on a plane in New Orleans at the Ace Hotel, tickets are on our website. You can find us at thurmanperryfoundation.org. That is THURMANPERRY foundation.org. And if you'd like to purchase a ticket or see more about our event, find us at Instagram, Thurman Perry Foundation. Find us on Twitter, Thurman Perry FDN. Be wary of me on Twitter. I'm always yelling.
I feel like that's the appropriate use of Twitter for a Black woman. Just saying.
I feel like that's the only way I can get people to hear me is when I'm yelling. So, but yeah, I think any support at all, even if it's $1, it absolutely helps. And so, yeah, just keep. Oh, and make sure you follow our newsletter. The first thing it's going to prompt you when you go to our website is to follow our newsletter, so you can keep up with what we have going on, keep up with our girls. We have the success stories of the organization. Really, the thing that make me the happiest.
Wow.
It's the greatest honor of my life to be able to pay for the educations of these girls and have them not once doubt their abilities, that they can do whatever it is that they want to do, that they can have whatever it is that they want to have. They are not stuck in the worst moment of their lives. And so that's what all this money goes towards. Like, this is really my purpose. It's what I'm on this earth for.
Wow. Thank you so much for joining us, Gabrielle.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much for joining me for this conversation. I hope that you got as much out of it as I did. Feel free to continue the conversation with us over on Facebook at the Impostrix Podcast Validating Space. We welcome all, and it's a space for us to validate each other as we work through work, race, and imposter syndrome. You can find out more about me or about the podcast at www.impostrixpodcast.com. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram at Impostrix Podcast. Until next time, be validated.